Hello and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host Kirill, and today we're going to be discussing the formation of the Albanian national consciousness. Specifically, we're going to be reviewing this book, The Formation of the Albanian National Consciousness by A.K. Brackup. A.K. Brackup was a student of the late Professor Keith Hitchens from the University of Illinois. Hitchens was a professor in Eastern European history, specializing in Romanian history, and he wrote this excellent book, A Concise History of Romania. He's regarded as a very knowledgeable expert on Romanian history, both in the West and in Romania. And like I said, A.K. Brackup, who published this book, was a student of Hitchens, and Brackup went on to write his own books regarding Romanian history and Albanian history. So basically this video is me reviewing this book, going through it, and discussing Brackup's theories on the Albanian national identity and its formation. I'll also be giving some of my own commentary regarding his historical positions. And before we get into it, I just want to say that I'm very well aware that there are political tensions between Albanians and Macedonians in Macedonia over the past 30 years, and those hostilities still exist. However, I'm not getting into any of that today. This video is simply a kind of a Western academic analysis of the formation of the Albanian national identity. This video is in no way a commentary on any of the geopolitical issues that have been going on in the Balkans in the past 30 years, just to make that clear. Now, the first question which Brackup addresses in his book is in regard to the origins of the modern Albanian nation, and he, in no uncertain terms, puts forward the claim that the modern Albanians are the descendants of the ancient Illyrians. In fact, he writes in his book, quote, "The Albanians are the descendants of the ancient Illyrians, who inhabited the Balkan Peninsula since pre-Homeric times. The antiquity of the people in their homeland is an important element of the ethnic Albanian identity, as they are distinguished by being the oldest inhabitants of the peninsula, and because they speak a language derived from ancient Illyrian, distinct from that of their Slavic and Greek neighbors. Only in the 15th century, however, did a sense of ethnic identity develop among the Albanians during their resistance to the Ottoman invasions. This resistance, led by George Kastriota Skenderbeg, brought Albanians of various regions speaking different dialects together in a common struggle against foreign aggression." Now, personally, I think that Brackup probably should have provided a bit more nuance in this statement. Even though the Illyrian theory is very popular among Albanians, and it does have support among Western academics, as we see here, he should have indicated that the Illyrian theory is just one of the many theories that exist on the origins of the Albanians. Even among Albanians themselves, there are different theories. For example, I've seen Albanians claim that they are actually the descendants of the Dardanians, not the Illyrians. I've seen other Albanians claim that they are actually the descendants of a Proto-Albanian group in the Balkans from antiquity that was neither Illyrian nor Dardanian. There's also a Thracian theory on the origins of the Albanians, which I'm not going to get into now, but I do find very interesting. But regardless of the precise origins of the Albanians, all of the theories surrounding the Albanian ethnic origins do point to them being a quote-unquote Paleo-Balkan people, meaning they are descendants of indigenous inhabitants of the Balkans. And even linguistic experts will agree that the Albanian language is a Paleo-Balkan language, that it originates in the Balkan region. Now, those of you who have been watching my channel for some time will know that I'm no fan of the modern phenomena of antiquization. This is where modern Balkan nations will attempt to make a direct connection to the peoples of antiquity, whether it's the modern Macedonians claiming direct descent from the ancient Macedonians, the Bulgarians claiming the Thracians, Romanians claiming the Dacians, or even Albanians claiming the Illyrians. And the reason why I personally find this phenomenon to be a bit illegitimate is due to the fact that so much has changed in the Balkans over the centuries from antiquity until today. We've had numerous migrations, numerous different empires coming in. A lot has changed, again, over these centuries. The Balkans is definitely a type of crossroads. It's a bridge between Europe and Asia. And given that fact, like I said, a lot has changed over the centuries. And Albania, frankly, is not immune to this. The Albanian lands were not excluded from these various different migrations, movements, change in empire, and so forth. So, although Balkan nations certainly have a layered history, there's different layers to the history, and certainly the ancient history, it does have a place within the history of all Balkan nations, including the Albanians. Like I said, I think the Albanians have also experienced some of this demographic change that has occurred in the Balkans over the centuries, and therefore to claim that they're pure Illyrians or something like that is not legitimate. I don't think any Balkan nation can claim to be the pure descendant of the ancient peoples. Even the Greeks, who have certainly managed to maintain a great deal of linguistic and cultural continuity from antiquity, have had massive demographic changes in their history. Even during the Slavic invasion of the early Middle Ages, there was a huge Slavic presence in Greece, not just in the region of Aegean Macedonia, but also in Thessaly, down to the Peloponnesus, even in the Aegean Islands. And it was due to Byzantine administration that those Slavs were Hellenized and kind of incorporated into the Greek nation. So even the Greeks, who certainly have a certain continuity to antiquity, are not the same exact people that they were back in the ancient times. Now, regardless of the exact origins of the Albanians, going back to antiquity, really the modern national myth of the Albanians starts with Skenderbeg. As Braca puts forward in his book, it was Skenderbeg, the 15th century Albanian noble, that first united the divided and tribal peoples of Albania and solidified the Albanians under one cause, that being resistance to the Ottoman Empire. Now, I'm not going to get into Skenderbeg a great deal due to the fact that I plan on making a whole separate video on Skenderbeg in the future, but I will quote Braca very briefly in this regard. He writes, quote, "Skenderbeg himself became the focus of this ethnic identity. His 25-year resistance to the Ottoman invasions forged a sense of unity among the Albanians. Even for peasants in those areas of the country that did not participate in Skenderbeg's revolt, he symbolized their struggle against foreign and domestic oppression, and they kept his memory alive. This was readily apparent during the Albanian rebellion in 1481. The region of Himara, south of Vlora on the Adriatic coast where the rebellion began, had never been under Skenderbeg's control. Yet, when the rebellion broke out, they sent representatives to the Kingdom of Naples to recall Skenderbeg's son, John Castriota, from Italy to lead the revolt. Upon his return to Albania, all of the liberated areas of the country recognized John Castriota as their prince." What factors cause the development of a national consciousness? There can be no simple answer to this question. In any particular instance, a number of different factors can be identified. Among the Albanians, the driving force in the development of a national consciousness was the strong desire to preserve their ethnic individuality against the external forces that threatened to destroy their language and customs. The Albanian nationalist, Pashko Vasa, clearly indicated this when he wrote, quote, "We do not want the Albanian people to lose their characteristic type, their customs, their legends, and their language. These are the only riches that our fathers bequeathed to us. We wish to conserve them." The theory that Braca puts forward in his book is that it was really the revival of the Slavic and the Greek identities in the 19th century which put pressure on the Albanians to assert their own distinct national identity. Especially in the early 19th century, when we see the formation of the Greek state and the Serbian state, that's when we see the Albanians really kind of fearing that their lands that they have historically lived on will be incorporated into these different states, the Greek and the Serbian state. And that's when the push for a distinct Albanian national identity really kind of comes about. In a way, the formation of the modern Albanian identity was a conscious decision by the Albanians to differentiate themselves from the different neighboring Balkan peoples. For example, the Albanian nationalist leader Ismail Kemal writes, quote, irrespective of their region or religion, they manifested more clearly their conviction of racial individuality, as distinct from that of the other peoples of the Balkans, and affirmed more and more their decision not to be subjugated by any foreign government, Greek or Slav. Also, Brackup writes in his book that, quote, the Albanian national consciousness formed in response to these threats. So we can see that the Albanian national consciousness and its formation is, in a way, a reaction to the other Balkan identities asserting themselves in the late Ottoman period. Now, similar to other Balkan national movements in the 19th century, the early Albanian nationalists will use historical claims to legitimize their movement. They'll make claims to the Illyrians and even to pre-Illyrian peoples such as the Pelasgi in order to establish a basis for their territorial claims. Here I'll quote from A.K. Brackup. As was true of other Balkan peoples, such as the Romanians, the question of origins for the Albanian people had serious political implications. Naum Velikarji, Jeromin de Rada, Pashko Vasa, and other prominent intellectuals advocated the theory that the Albanians were descendants of the Pelasgi, the oldest inhabitants of the Balkan Peninsula. The other popular theory, and the one generally accepted today, is that the Albanians were the direct descendants of the ancient Illyrians. Henry Holland, an English traveler to Albania in the 19th century, encountered this view and remarked, quote, if the opinion be well formed that the Albanians are the descendants of the ancient Illyrians, they may be considered as actually inhabiting the country which belonged to their remote ancestors. End quote. Both theories regard the Albanians as indigenous inhabitants of the Balkan Peninsula. This point was critical to Albanian nationalists. It proved the autochthony of the people and their lands, and thus served as an important political weapon in refuting the claims of neighboring peoples to portion the Albanian territories. Brackup goes on to write, quote, the leading figure of the League of Prizren, Abdil Frasheri, made a similar appeal to European public opinion when he wrote in La Messager de Vienne on the 17th of May, 1878, quote, we are not a branch of the Greek nation, but an older nation than the Greeks. Our language has with the Greek language those ties with Sanskrit has to the German. End quote. These nationalists strove to preserve the territorial integrity of their lands by making Europe aware that the Albanians were a nation distinct from their Balkan neighbors. Thus, the question of origins of the Albanian people had strong political implications. Just a quick side note here. The text mentioned the League of Prizren. What that league is basically an Albanian revolutionary organization which was dedicated to preventing the partition of the Albanian lands and promoting unity amongst the Albanian people, and it was formed in 1878. Basically, after the Treaty of Berlin in 1878, the Albanian lands, like the Macedonian lands, were left under Ottoman control and were not liberated. Therefore, the League of Prizren is essentially the Albanian version of the IMRO in Macedonia. They are formed in opposition to the Treaty of Berlin and the borders which it creates. Now, going back to these claims that the early Albanian nationalists were making, that they are the direct descendants of the Illyrians or even older people such as the Pelasgi, I think this is just again, a demonstration of this phenomenon that occurs in the Balkans where nations will make far-fetched historical claims, and they will do this in order to legitimize their territorial ambitions. For example, we can clearly see this in Macedonia, where you have the Slavic element as well as the Greek element, both claiming ancestry from Alexander the Great in order to legitimize their territorial ambitions over Aegean Macedonia or Greek Macedonia. Again, I don't think either side really truly believe that they are the direct descendants of Alexander the Great, or that the Albanians really believe that they were the direct descendants of the ancient Illyrians. This is again a phenomenon where a group of people will make a historical claim in order to kind of veil their territorial ambitions. So if the Slavic Macedonians wish to control Aegean Macedonia, they'll say, well, we're the descendants of the ancient Macedonians. These territories belong to the ancient Macedonians. Therefore, those territories belong to us. The Greeks will make the mirror argument where they'll say, we're the descendants of the ancient Macedonians. Therefore, this territory belongs to us. So, again, when in the 19th century, when a lot of this territory was kind of up for grabs with the kind of demise of the Ottoman Empire, we see that these historical claims are really veiled attempts to conceal territorial ambitions. This should not be taken seriously that these people are really the direct descendants of the ancient peoples, whether it's, again, Slavic Macedonians, Greeks, Albanians, and so forth. This is simply a political tool that was used for territorial legitimacy, not, again, for any sort of historical accuracy. And we can see here in Bracob's work how this phenomenon also played a role in the early nationalist movement in Albania. He writes, quote, "History played an important political role during the years of the League of Prizren, when Abdil Fresheri and Mehmet Ali Vrioni undertook their diplomatic mission on behalf of the League to Rome, Paris, London, Berlin, and Vienna in the spring of 1879, seeking recognition of their national rights of the Albanians from the great powers of Europe. They brought with them pamphlets explaining the history, geography, and ethnography of the Albanian lands. Fresheri relied upon history, asserting the antiquity of the people in the homeland and their strident resistance to the Ottomans in attempting to influence the European public opinion in support of the cause of the League of Prizren." He goes on to write, "History was not only an important factor in the formation of the national consciousness, but also in asserting the national rights of the Albanians to the rest of Europe." Now, a major project of the Albanian nationalists during the 19th century was the collection and the preservation of customs and folklore, whether it's songs, poems, stories, tales, what have you. So you had figures like Elena Gica, who was a Romanian princess of Albanian origin, who was definitely active in this project of collecting and preserving these customs and this folklore. Another individual early on was Timi Mitko, an Albanian from Korça, who published in 1878 the Albanian Bee, which was a collection of folk tales, poems, songs, etc. Even outside of Albania, we had Albanians in Italy who are known as the Arbaresh, who are also very active in this collection and preservation of customs and folklore. The Arbaresh, the Albanians of Italy, had schools of their own, and already in 1794, an institution of higher education, the Collegio de San Adriano in Calabria. In 1848, Jeromin de Rada, the most prominent Arbaresh intellectual, published the first Albanian newspaper, La Albanese de Italia, in Naples. The Albanians of Italy provided important support for the formation of a national consciousness among their fellow countrymen across the Adriatic. They actively encouraged the national awakening in their homeland and lent material and financial assistance to the Albanian cause whenever possible. Another important aspect of the Albanian national formation is the creation of a written language and alphabet. The first major figure to tackle this issue was the 19th century revolutionary Naum Velikarji. The most important leader of the Albanian national movement in the early part of the 19th century was Naum Velikarji. Velikarji was born in Vithkuk near Korça in 1797. In 1806, while still a boy, he emigrated with his family to Romania, where he was exposed to the ideas of nationalism and the Enlightenment. Influenced by these ideas, Velikarji joined the Greek revolutionary organization Veliki Heteria and participated, along with his other countrymen, in the rebellion of 1821 in the Romanian principalities led by Tudor Vladimirescu. The exposure to these ideas of nationalism and the practical political experience they gained in Vladimirescu's revolt led Velikarji and the Albanians living in Romania to begin their work for the cause of Albanian nationalism. As early as 1824, Velikarji began compiling a special Albanian alphabet of 33 letters. He felt that rather than adopting the Latin, Arabic, or Greek alphabets, the Albanian language should have a special alphabet of its own to testify to its unique character. Now, after Velikarji's death or suspected assassination, another Albanian revolutionary, Konstantin Kristoforidi, would take over Velikarji's work in this area, and it was Cristoforidi, who is known for translating the Bible into Albanian and publishing the first Albanian dictionary. Despite a lot of this cultural progress, the Albanians still didn't solve their issue in regard to creating a uniform alphabet. Velikarji's alphabet that he created early on in the 19th century really never took hold, and the Albanians continued to use various different alphabets for their language. The establishment of a uniform alphabet was a fundamental problem that had to be overcome to develop a written language. Some intellectuals like Zefjubani and Hasan Tassini argued, as had Naum Velikarji earlier, that since the Albanian language was linguistically unique, it should have its own special alphabet. Other nationalists, such as Jani Vreto, argued that the Greek alphabet should be adopted to stress the ties between the Albanian and Greek peoples as the earliest inhabitants of the Balkan Peninsula. Muslim leaders, supported by the Ottoman government when the ban on printing in Albanian was lifted in 1878, favored the Turco-Arabic script as a means of protecting Islamic culture and Ottoman influence in Albania. The Latin alphabet was favored by the Arbaresh and the Catholics of northern Albania. Nationalists such as Ismail Kemal and Pashko Vasa advocated the Latin alphabet for the very practical reason that the letters were more readily available for printing. The issue would not be settled until November 1908, when the Congress of Monastir established the modern Albanian alphabet using Latin characters. What Brakup argues in his book is that it's this creation of a uniform Albanian alphabet, grammar, language, which serves as a unifying force for the Albanians, who are actually quite divided at this time among different regional and certainly religious identities. And therefore, the alphabet, the grammar, the language is a kind of glue that binds the Albanians together and really promotes this idea of a national unity and promotes the national consciousness that we see in the 19th and into the 20th century. Now, the biggest difference between the Albanians and the other Balkan nations is the religious division within the ethnic group. Other nations in the Balkans are much more religiously homogenous. For example, the Macedonians, Bulgarians, Serbs, Romanians, Greeks are predominantly Orthodox Christians. The Croatians and Slovenians are predominantly Catholic. However, the Albanians are much less religiously homogenous. At the turn of the 20th century, about 70% of the Albanians are Muslims, about 20% are Orthodox Christians, and 10% are Catholics. Normally, this would be a giant barrier to national unity. However, this is not really the case in Albania, and Brakup argues that this is not the case in Albania due to the fact that religion was never really that important to the Albanians, and therefore wasn't much of a barrier to national unity. The problem of religious division was not as difficult to overcome as it might appear at first glance. Over the centuries, religion had only a minor influence on Albanian life, owing to the rural character and geographic isolation of the country. Both Christianity and Islam were imposed upon pre-existing pagan beliefs. The English anthropologist Edith Durham observed, quote, "The cross, or the verses of the Quran, are simply amulets. Under all lies a bedrock of prehistoric paganism, which has perhaps more influence in their lives than either of the other two." End quote. Albanian nationalists stressed that it was cultural unity which bound together the people of different faiths. Pashko Vasa wrote of the limited influence of religion in fundamentally altering the basic customs of the people. Quote, "Independently of so many other religious practices which are related to the ancient cult of Pelasgus, and which neither Christ nor Muhammad have completely disappeared from the minds of the Albanian people, there is the oath on the stone, which exists and is still used in all the mountains of Albania." End quote. The limited influence of religion in the country regularly impressed foreign visitors. Commenting upon the numerous conversions to Islam, William Martin Leake wrote, quote, "Such of the Albanians as have renounced Christianity have done it entirely for political motives, and for the sake of enjoying Turkish dignities, and the other advantages derived from professing the governing religion. Their laxity of religious practice is a common subject of ridicule among the Turks." End quote. T.S. Hughes made a similar observation when he wrote in 1830 that, quote, The Albanian Mohammedan is not more observant of doctrine, rite, and ceremony under his new law than he was under his old one, and is looked upon with great contempt by the rigid Osmanli." End quote. This casual attitude toward organized religion greatly assisted the development of the Albanian national consciousness, despite the religious division of the country. Among the Albanians themselves, Edith Durham wrote, there is no religious hatred. Because the people did not define themselves by faith, the religious division of the country was not an insurmountable obstacle for the development of a national consciousness. Edith Durham related, quote, "In face of a common foe, Muslim and Christian Albania unite. Some nations have a genius for religion. The Albanians, as a race, are singularly devoid of it. Their Mohammedanism and their Christianity sit but lightly atop them, and in his heart the wild mountaineer is swayed more by unwritten beliefs that date from the world's wellsprings." So what we see here is that during the formation of the Albanian consciousness, due to the religious divisions that exist within the country and the supposed nominalism of the Albanians towards their religion, it is really nationalism and patriotism that take the place of religion as kind of the spiritual motivation of the Albanian people. Brackup writes here, quote, "Pashko Vaso's poem, Mori Shqipni Amjera Shqipni, O Albania, Poor Albania, is one example of this. Quote, "Awake Albanians from age-long slumber. On church and mosque rely no longer. You owe no duty to priest or pope. To love your country is your only hope." Now, the question still remains on how did this nationalist idea in Albania spread to the general population? As we said before, Albania at this time is very rural. The Albanians are very isolated from one another, and information at that time did not travel quickly, certainly not as quickly as it does today. And Brackup's theory is that it was actually the slow urbanization of Albania which assisted in this Albanian nation-building process. Albania experienced significant economic growth during the 19th century. This is evidenced by the growth of cities and the increase in the size of local markets. In the period of 1830 to 1840 to 1900 to 1912, the size of cities grew by an average of 37%, while the number of shops in the bazaars increased by 56%. The peasants from the surrounding countryside came to the local bazaar to trade livestock, grain, and handicrafts. These centers not only brought the peasants into contact with one another, but also with the wider world. The bazaar was not only an economic center, but also a social and political center where the peasants encountered ideas of nationalism. Edward Knight observed that, quote, "This crowded market is the common rendezvous and answers for the purpose of a club." End quote. The assassination of Mehmed Ali, an Ottoman official sent to Albania in 1878 to convince the League to comply with the decisions of the Congress of Berlin and to relinquish Plava and Gusia to Montenegro, illustrates the significance of the bazaar as a political center. Knight recorded, quote, "His death was decided on by the League. The projected murder was talked about freely in the bazaars of Albania fully 2 weeks before it was perpetrated." End quote. The growth of the internal market brought the peasants into closer contact with one another, and the bazaars served an important center for the diffusion of nationalist ideas among the rural population. The formation of the Albanian national consciousness during the period preceding the formation of the League of Prizren was critical to the creation of the national movement. The national consciousness did not suddenly develop in response to the crisis of 1878. As we have seen, this process began in the early period of the 19th century. Intellectual leaders such as Naum Velikarji, Konstantin Kristoforidi, and Pashko Vasa played a critical role in the creation of a national movement to prevent the partitioning of Albanian lands among the neighboring Balkan states. Their efforts fostered the development of the Albanian national consciousness. Despite the repression of the League of Prizren by the Ottoman forces in the spring of 1881, the national struggle of the Albanian people to preserve their territory and culture enhanced their sense of national consciousness. The temporary reestablishment of Ottoman political control did not blunt this achievement. Thus, the formation of the Albanian national consciousness in the period preceding the crisis of 1878 was of vital importance for the future of the people by creating the basis for the foundation of the Albanian national state in 1912.